Hi, welcome to Mindful Conversations. I'm Greg Dwyer. My guest is Tim David. He's written this book called Magic Words. He's a good friend of mine. He drove 3 hours to be here today, and I'm so looking forward to this interview. Tim, thank you for being on Mindful Conversations.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invite. It's cool to be here, man. It's cool to be here.
So this is how I found you. This is how you're sitting here. I'm in a Barnes & Noble, 4 or 5 years ago. I can't remember. I see this book, Magic Words, and I think to myself, I have to buy this book. And I did, and I started reading it. And then a couple years later, I met you because we belonged to a same group called Epic with Ken Dine, and we became friends. And here you are, doing this today. This is amazing. So what inspired you to write a book called Magic Words?
Started as a magician, Greg. You can't ignore your past. You can't ignore your roots or where you come from. Not to say that I would want to, per se, but when I began this journey into writing and speaking, I thought that it would be important to move away from magic and not be viewed as just little Johnny's birthday party magician. As an author, as a thought leader, or as an expert, you kind of want to have a little bit of credibility. Right. As a magician, that's not like a job. You don't go to magic college and get a degree in magicology. There's no specific traditional career path. There's no marketable skills. Right. So when I wanted to become, an expert, my path then was to take what I learned on the stage and begin using it on stages at corporate events, at association meetings and conferences as a speaker.
Sure.
So what I learned very, very quickly, maybe that's an understatement because, we were talking about this at lunch, the process is honed and developed over many, and the message is honed and developed over many, many times delivering it.
Right.
So Magic Words is a result of speaking on the topic of leadership and influence to audiences around the country, hundreds, if not maybe even over 1,000 of them, and slowly making the realization that there are elements of communication, there are pieces of communication, there are certain words that just create more of an impact. I say they sort of poke you in the brain in just the right way, just the right time, and those words became fascinating to me. I became consumed for the search for magic words. Never really gave it up. That book was published in 2014. Never stopped writing it. So there are, many more magic words than 7 that are sort of in the can, ready for the right book project, ready for the right speaking project. But the concept that there are words that carry more weight or more meaning universally to human brains is what fascinated me. It's almost like this real magic. It's almost like a real magic moment that there is a button you can press in the human brain and it's going to get a predictable, reliable result.
Right.
And that skill was what I learned as a magician. Changing a word in the script made a big difference in the laugh that I got.
Sure.
Or in the amazement factor of that trick. So little tiny changes in language, the things that people ignore, the words between the other words, the and, if, but, these words, how do they affect the brain? And I became a total word nerd and fascinated with that. And that's sort of where the transition, I know it's a long story wrapped up in this little chunk of time here, but that's essentially the process.
Well, you mentioned real magic, and we have a mutual friend, Kenton, and he did this whole series, audio tapes at the time.
Audio tapes.
Wonder Words.
Oh,
right?
yeah, yes.
Wonder Words? Yes.
Wonder Words, yeah, and I'm a huge fan. I certainly, had gone through every single one of those programs over the years, even before. And I think that's what maybe part of what leaked into my speaking. I would say if you want this behavior change in your employees, if you want to motivate people, it's not about money. It's about this idea of what is their because. So you say because and then provide a reason, they're more likely to engage in that behavior. So it's about creating, behavior change in that case. And yeah, that absolutely fascinates me, and Kenton influenced that piece. And you pick things up, like I said, from scripting and from life experience, studying
Sure.
psychology and neuroscience, and just generally being
Right.
being that word nerd.
Well, as you walk out, on stage and you did magic, what year was the magic phase of your life? What year was that?
So right out of high school, when I got my first side job, I realized, magic, I want it to be my career. I don't want to be working a minimum wage. I don't want to be flipping burgers.
Sure.
I don't want to be working behind a desk. I had a dream.
Right.
So I did everything I could, and long story short, it was pretty much, I left college, my first year of college. So that would be 1999.
What did your dad think when you left college to pursue a life as a magician?
Yeah, it's funny. People often go to the father figure and say, "Hey, what was this like for your dad?" And truthfully, my whole family. My older brother is a sound engineer. He went off to college. He works for Bose Speaker Corporation.
Okay.
Very traditional career path. My mother was an accountant. Very traditional career path.
Yeah.
You go to my father was designed nuclear submarines for the Navy. He was an engineer. He was a physics teacher for a while, and very traditional. Go to college, get your degree. In his case, several.
Sure.
And then start your career.
Right.
So I sort of bucked the trend, not just culturally, but in my family.
Big time.
Big time.
Yeah.
And we butted heads for a while. We locked horns for a while. He had his way of showing encouragement and showing love. I think as a parent, that's all you can do.
Right.
And he did this thing. Where he said, "You want to do this? All right. I'm going to charge you rent.
Okay.
I'm going to charge you rent, and we'll show you what reality is. That's I don't need your money, but you need the object lesson." So sure enough, I'm paying him rent month after month, struggling to become a magician, struggling to make ends meet, racking up debt, tons of debt. And at the end of the day, after I became, had a turnaround, had a breakthrough, became successful, learned how to use the skill of influence to, as a salesperson, as a marketer, as a business owner,
right.
These were important skills. So I developed those out of necessity.
Mm-hmm.
And, sort of went from, let's say we went from 0 to 60, became
Right.
successful. And then that's when Dad, here's all the rent money that I
So
collected from you.
he gives
it
it back.
all back to me, got
That's
me off
great.
to, when I moved out of the house, I got it all back.
Wow, that's a great story.
So yeah, total object. Probably going to steal it. Probably going to use it with my own kids. Yeah.
Wow.
I don't think I'll give them the money back. But I think that's brilliant.
Well, as a magician, you're walking out there, you're framing a conversation, you're telling a story, you're taking people on a journey. How is that any different from sales? How is that any different from working with a team of people? You're setting a story, you're setting a frame, you're using words, you're looking at how to motivate people, and you're looking for a reaction.
And what I love about the magic laboratory, the magician's stage laboratory, right? Because a lot of times we perform and we're experimenting, we're trying things out. What I love about that is that framework and the pre-existing framework. What do people assume about a magician? When you hear the term magician, this guy's going to try to trick me. This person's going to try to pull one over on me, get the best of me, fool me, make me look like a fool. I'm gonna watch really closely. I'm going to be very skeptical, like a 6-year-old in timeout. Sometimes there were 6-year-olds in timeout. I'm telling you, I did a lot of school shows, preschools, birthday parties, and they were trouble kids as well. So to that end, you learn very quickly how to break down pre-existing barriers, deal with those difficult situations and difficult people, create a connection with an audience, and it has to work. It has to.
Right.
Just because you're in Tuscaloosa and you're performing for an audience of corporate executives, it still has to work when you're back home doing a program for the local elementary school and there's 300 second graders in the audience.
Yeah.
It still has to work, and it has to work quickly, because when you lose them, you lose them. And a lot of new leaders experience this. Their employees, they're the coworker, their peers, and then they get promoted. And now they got the 6-year-old and I should have had your job. You're not qualified for this. I am. There's resentment. There's negativity, and you still have to break down before any real connection can happen.
Right.
You've got to sort of get through to that person. So again, these skills I slowly learned were actually valuable, actually marketable, actually interesting. And a few years later, became very interesting to the field of neuroscience. And
Well, you read my mind. How did you go from the magic and the bunny rabbits to the
Right, right,
neuroscience and the mentalism? I mean, because you really marketed yourself as a mentalist, didn't you, for a while?
yeah, so I transitioned, and again, out of necessity.
Okay.
You can't do 300 or 350 shows a year and have a life.
Why is that? You're always on the road, you mean? Or
Just
what?
travel time. It's
Okay.
not just the gig itself. It's the travel. It's the running of the business.
Yeah.
It's, and I was largely, for the majority of that time, a one-man show, one-man operation.
Okay.
So it's just a logistical time thing. I can't be gone from my newborn daughter for 3, 4, 5 weeks at a time.
Right.
I just don't, I don't want to.
Right.
So I wanted to make some kind of life change, and learned very quickly to just basically go after the bigger fish,
Okay.
sort of from a business standpoint, and that is performing for grown-ups. Again, there's a perception of 4-year-old little birthday party. You're not going to be,
Right.
laughing all the way to the bank
Right.
for little Jimmy's birthday party. So, needless to say, I needed to work less, but
Mm-hmm.
earn the same amount of money because I had now more adult responsibilities. I had
Sure.
a home, I had a wife, I had a daughter on the way. So it was once again designed out of necessity. And do adults connect and relate to a magician? Some do. Some pull it off very well. David Copperfield, there's some big names out there.
Sure.
There are some not so big names who can do that very, very well.
Mm-hmm.
My skill set was certainly entertaining children until, again, I needed to make that segue. So I changed art forms, or I shifted art forms in how I framed what I was doing for a new audience.
Well, what I understand about magic is there's the magic world and there's the mentalism world. And some people do a magic show and they throw in mentalism. But I also know it's almost like denominationalism, religion.
Yeah,
Some
there's a little bit of-
mentalists want nothing to do with magic. Some magicians hate, mentalism. I mean, how did you just flip the switch and say, I'm going to go here?
Well, like anything for me, because even though I haven't had a traditional sort of educational path, I am still this conservative style of risk, how I approach risk.
Right.
So it's a little bit at a time. It's take a baby step. It's take a baby
Right.
step. And yeah, some magicians, some mentalists will think it's blasphemy to mix the two.
Right.
But my audiences were the ones, in my opinion, who were the judge and the jury. They were the ones who mattered. Those are the ones I'm trying to impress.
Right.
Those are the ones I'm trying to win over. And they didn't have those kinds of hard lines.
Okay.
They could enjoy a magic show with a hint of a mentalism effect
Okay.
within the framework of a magic show. So because you're right, mentalism is very difficult to practice. It's a lot about reading,
Right.
there's a lot of psychology involved, and the psychology is different for people when they're on stage in front of a camera or in front of an audience than it is sitting at home. You can't just practice it.
Right, you need an audience.
It's like doing a backflip. You can't just practice it halfway. You know what I mean? You've got to do the whole thing.
We should back up. What is mentalism? Because people might be watching this and going, I know what magic is.
Sure.
So let's just describe it. What is mentalism? Because
Yeah,
most people...
right, because you and I were immersed in this world. We
Yeah.
understand those terms.
Yeah.
And I almost never introduced myself as a mentalist when I was performing. I introduced myself as a brain science magician.
Okay.
So, and those 3 words were really the best I could do. I struggled with how do you communicate what this is
Right.
quickly and succinctly. So it is, what I also say, and this is a hint as far as one of the magic words, not in this book, but I will tell people what I'm not. I am not a psychic.
You're not a psychic.
I'll say I'm not a psychic. And that communicates, like why is he telling me that he's not a psychic? Well, he must do things that are like what a psychic would do.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So I communicate what I am via saying what I am not.
Right.
And a lot of companies are using this in their marketing. My wife got a thing in the mail the other day. It said, "This is not a beauty box." I took a picture of it. This is not a beauty box. That tells me a lot about what it is.
Right.
Just by the very nature of telling me what it's not.
Exactly.
Or at least it hints. It alludes to it. It makes me curious and engages me more. So Tony Robbins, I am not your guru.
Oh, I love it. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So it's that sort of thing. So I'll say I'm not a psychic. I'm also not a magician. I'm somewhere in between.
But what about the word not? Does the mind conceive of that word or just brushes over it?
Yeah, the word not is very difficult for the brain to process.
So maybe you are the guru. Maybe you are the psychic.
Right.
I don't know.
It's a bit of a, it's I call it the disappearing word. It's a word that disappears.
Yeah, right.
You're on a plane 36,000 feet in the air.
Uh-huh.
Captain comes over the loudspeaker. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I just want to let you know that there is absolutely no cause for concern.
Oh, I hate that.
Right? What are you gonna? This happened to me in real life. It's a Monty Python skit, but it happened to me in real life. 36,000 feet in the air.
Really?
And your brain immediately erases the negative piece. And it's, what do you mean? What should I be concerned?
What happened to you? What happened?
Anxiety.
No, but I mean, what was the situation? Was it turbulence or what was?
There was. He explained later. There's something called a power transfer unit. It was making a weird sound. It sounded like a dog barking under, or a saw. It was a weird sound. So he said no cause for concern.
So what would be a better way to reframe that? If you're going to be this neuro-linguistic guy, or what would you coach him? How would you say it differently? Everything's okay? What would that be?
So it's difficult. In some cases, it is the best thing to say is nothing. Is to to refrain entirely.
Okay.
If someone is expressing concern, you do want to reassure them everything's okay.
Right.
Let's bring it back to the workplace. I hear this all the time. Can you pop by my office maybe Friday afternoon?
Oh my Lord.
3:30-ish. You're not in trouble. You're not in trouble.
Yeah.
Immediately, you're not in trouble. It still causes the anxiety.
It does.
It still causes the very effort of alleviating the anxiety. You're not in trouble, right? Causes the anxiety.
And I don't have a boss, and I'm starting to get anxious.
Right.
Yeah, you know what I mean?
I love the example too. If you don't have a boss, the example of you can try this. You can try this. You can get home and say immediately, honey, I just want to let you know I did not cheat on you today.
Oh.
And immediately, what? Why are you telling me this?
But I could have, but I didn't.
I didn't cheat on you today. I just want to let you know that.
But
That's
don't
what
ask
did not
me about
happen
yesterday.
Today. So my daughter once, she was 3 years old, I came downstairs, and I was just going around the corner down to the basement, right where my office is.
Yeah.
And before I could even get through, she's in the living room, she just says, I don't have anything. Her hands are behind her back, and I'm like, okay, what do you got? So
That's
funny. And this is the beautiful thing I think about, or maybe not the beautiful, it's the challenge of language.
Yes.
Is that many times the part of the brain that does the speaking is different than the part of the brain that does the listening.
Okay.
So our intentions in our head are very clear. I am telling you I don't have anything. I am telling you I did not cheat on you. I am saying in plain English, don't be nervous, right?
Right.
It's having the exact opposite effect. And that's why I think these words can sometimes be magical. It's almost like an illusion in a way. And the space between the intentional communication and the actual communication is similar to the space between perception and reality that a magician takes advantage of.
Makes sense.
Right?
Right.
So that's how we create magic, is we create the illusion and we dance that line between perception and reality.
Right.
Communication is the same thing. There's
is.
a perception or an intention, and there's a reality or an interpretation.
Right.
And the space between is where a lot of disagreement, quite frankly, where a lot of stress comes from. If you end up at the end of the day and you sink in your chair and you're like, and you're just stressed at the end,
Right.
crack
You
open
wanna
a Diet Coke or whatever,
relieve
Diet
the
Coke or whatever.
Yeah.
Then that's a sign or a symptom that there's a communication disconnect.
Interesting.
With the people that you work with. If you work with people, you want to know how people work.
I love that. Say that again.
If you work with people, you want to know how people work. I very intentionally said you want to know how people work, not you need to know how people work.
Right.
If I had said you need to know how people work,
There's a lot of pressure.
we call it a resistance trigger.
Yeah.
It's, once again, I'm saying you need to do this. You should do this.
Right.
We resist because, subconsciously speaking, and you may feel it consciously, you may not feel it, right? When someone says to you, you know what you should do.
Right.
Does that feel? It feels
Right.
like
Feels yucky.
you know, like
Yeah,
what do you mean trying to like? What am I stupid? Am I an idiot that I don't know what I should do? You're implying that I'm doing the wrong thing, and therefore it's very difficult for the human brain to accept that it's wrong.
But the average
about
person,
something,
the
right?
average person doesn't think, do they? Do they think about these specific words, or they just speak? You can't take it back. Once you say something, you're done.
It happens in the space between. Like I said, it's not a conscious awareness,
Right.
and it's also in the other person's reality.
Right.
It's the perception of, and this is once again the blessing of having a 8 years as a full-time professional magician.
Sure.
Is as a magician, our job is to obsess about what the other person sees.
Their reality.
Yeah, you've learned magic, you've studied magic. How many times have you heard the phrase "watch your angles"?
Yes, watch
You know,
your angles.
See what they're seeing from here in your mind. See what their perspective
Right.
is. Perspective taking. I mean, it's a skill. We all say, walk a mile in their shoes. See it from their perspective. It's
Exactly.
really, really hard to do that.
It is.
Without intentional effort and training over a period of time. It's not a habit that you're just born with. For the most part, there are very few people who have what they call high self-monitor, where they can really just high empathy, sort of really just understand other people's perspectives.
Because most people are thinking about themselves, right?
But everybody thinks they're one of those special people,
Oh, they do.
right? It's like everybody says, I'm an above average driver. Like 80% of the people, 90% of the people will say they're an above average driver. Mathematically, that's impossible.
Right.
We can't all be above average.
Sure.
So it's the same way with communication. We all believe we're better than we are, and the problems and the gaps are invisible to us because it's that words in between the words, it's the stuff behind the scenes, it's what's
Sure.
going on in the subconscious, that we get no valuable feedback on how to improve. So we'll say something, we won't get the result that we want, and we'll just think they're an idiot.
Ah,
And the more people that you think they're idiots, the bigger the problem you have,
right. Absolutely.
right? So
Sure.
it's just a matter of skill development. I mean, it's a learnable, teachable, acquirable skill, and it's just a matter of again increasing the level of your understanding of how people process what you say. In this
Right.
case, with magic words.
Well, with magic words, what are some of the words? I know one of them is because.
Yeah, we
And
got yes, but, if, because, someone's name, help, thanks, and a few more as yet to be revealed and released. But you know, the word because is, I think, a perfect example of something that is shockingly magical, and it took a Harvard psychologist to discover the weird quirk behind the magic word because. And she did an experiment where she wanted to cut in line in front of people.
Right.
Her name is
Xerox.
Ellen Langer, yep, at the Xerox machine in Harvard University, and this was in the 70s. And she didn't just cut in line, she used the magic words that all our parents taught us. Please.
Please.
Excuse me, may I please go before you? She had that script every time. Excuse me, may I please go before you? 67% of the people, about two-thirds, roughly two-thirds of the people said, sure, but also 30-something percent, roughly one-third of the percentage, said the back of the line's over there, lady.
Okay.
Right? And in her mind, she could have thought, that person's a jerk. That person is rude, right? Not her fault.
Right.
It's their fault for not being nice. But then she changed the script. She said, excuse me, may I please go before you because I'm in a rush.
Right.
94% of people now are letting her pass. 94% of people suddenly became super nice, right?
That's amazing.
All of a sudden. But that's not even the interesting part because it makes sense. It makes logical sense that if you provide a reason, it's more likely that people are going to comply with your request because now there's a reason. That's not the interesting part. That's not magical, right?
Right.
The magical part is what she did next. Excuse me, may I please go before you because I need to make some copies.
Wow. I just need to make some copies.
There's no new information. Yeah, we all need to make copies. That's why we're in line at the copy machine, so we can make copies, right?
Get back to the line?
Yeah.
No?
93% of people still let her go. So a tiny drop off.
Sure.
But here's what happens. You've been trained ever since you were a tiny child that after the word because comes a very good reason. Your parents know this, when they say because I said so.
Oh, okay.
They've given up on trying to fill in the reason. It's the because I said so, and that's going to have to be good enough. So what's interesting to me, right? What's interesting to me about the with no reason is that as the complexity of the task that you're asking them to do, as that increases, so does your need for an actual good reason.
Mm-hmm.
But it also has to be their reason. There's a bunch of parameters for which reasons work and which reasons don't.
Sure.
And this is we're getting at the essence of the science of human motivation. Is it possible? Can you motivate another human being? Is that even possible? Right? Can you influence another human being? Is that even possible?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is it's impossible.
It is impossible?
It's impossible not to.
Oh,
you know?
I love how you tricked me there.
Everything you say, everything you do, everything you don't say and don't do is influencing the thoughts, choices, behaviors, and actions of the people around us. Think about what's going on with the word because. Your brain is about 3 pounds. Okay, it's a small percentage of the overall body, but yet it uses about 20% of your body's energy.
Okay.
It is metabolically expensive to think, to run this thing.
So it looks for shortcuts?
Looks for shortcuts, looks for patterns.
Okay.
But those shortcuts are where things like optical illusions happen. Shortcuts are things like as you read, you don't look at every letter and reprocess what you learned in elementary school. You skim the words and get the meaning.
You don't see what's right in front of you.
If I hold up this mug, you immediately, if I say, what color is this? You don't, it's not that you don't have to think about it. It's that you can't not automatically, the blue just comes unless it's purple or whatever.
There.
Whatever you see,
Yeah.
it's the things that you know so deep that it's become pattern, right?
It's like I know a door opens this way,
Right.
perhaps.
And that's the word because. Those are all the magic words, right? All the magic words are so deeply ingrained in our communication that our brain takes a shortcut.
I see.
Excuse me, may I please go before you because doesn't matter. After the word because doesn't matter, right?
Right.
The compliance program has started to run.
That's
already.
Amazing.
So, and this is also frightening.
It is frightening. Well,
It's also frightening.
You can start a cult. You know, you can start
That's where you can start. Right.
You know?
So hopefully people use the magic for good.
Well, did you talk about this in Magic Words? But I'm going to have to ask you back because I'd like to talk about true influence and also talk about the 4 levels of influencing people. Because
I think that is probably a great segue. You know, talking about whether or not we use this for good. After that book came out, I saw a lot of things, was asked to do a lot of projects, began sort of having questions of, is the golden rule outdated?
In other words, could we use this to manipulate people?
Could we use this for selfish gain, personal gain, not do unto others as we would have them do unto us, but take advantage of these shortcuts and take advantage of people?
It's almost a form of hypnosis. I mean, I don't know if you get into hypnosis with this, but a lot of this is waking hypnosis. You're saying words that are triggering people to go into a trance. Do you know what I mean?
I think it's trances take time sort of to develop, so I sort of just go with magic words. You find the grooves that are already deep.
Yep.
You know, you don't have to necessarily, it's very, very difficult. Anybody who's tried to change someone's behavior, if you try to get someone to change, you know how difficult that is. So what I've learned over the years and what I was taught is really to find those grooves and not to make the grooves.
Right, that's a big difference.
Yeah.
So if you're finding a person's groove, it's easier to do that than to make it.
And that was Alan Langer's aha moment, why is there, I thought the groove was here, the groove's over here. That's wonderful. The surprise, that's the twist.
That is wonderful. Well, I got to tell you, the name of the show is Mindful Conversations, and I have no doubt that we have given you a mindful conversation. And I'm glad to be your friend, and I have to ask you back to do another episode where we're going to talk about true ethical influencing. Can you do that for me?
Would love to.
Excellent.
Would love to.
We'll see you next time on Mindful Conversations. Tim, David, thank you so much.